Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, I'm Griffith John, and today I'm going to continue my slides about ships, and like I promised in the last video, I'm going to talk about heavy cruisers. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about the general history of heavy cruisers, and also I'm going to talk about the detailed history of two ships, which is KMS Prince Eugene and USS Baltimore. So before we did it, before we talk about the history of Prince Eugene and USS Baltimore, first of all, what is heavy cruiser? Heavy cruiser was a type of cruiser, a naval warship designed for long range and high speed, armed generally with naval guns of roughly 203 millimeters, 8 inches in caliber, whose design parameters were dictated by the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and London Naval Treaty of 1930. The heavy cruiser is a part of the lineage of ships designed from 1915 through the early 1950s. Although the term heavy cruiser only came into formal use in 1930. The heavy cruiser's immediate precursors were the light cruiser design of the 1900s and 1910s, rather than the armored cruisers of the years before 1905. When when the armored cruiser was supplanted by the battle cruiser, an intermediate ship type between this and the light cruiser was found to be needed, one larger and more powerful than the light cruiser, one had a potentially one of light cruiser of a potential enemy, but not as large and as expensive as the battle cruiser, so as to be built in sufficient numbers to protect merchant ships and serve a number of combat theaters. So, in case you didn't know, uh, in World War II, um, they used ships to carry supplies around the world. So, if the merchant ship got destroyed, that means the supply get cut off. If the supply get cut off, means that yeah, you don't get ammo, you didn't get fuels, you can't run your ships, you're doomed. That's why they always protect merchant ships no matter what, to to prevent them from cutting their supply to prevent them from cutting their supplies. But intended targets be okay. So moving on with their intended targets being other cruisers and others and smaller vessels, the role of the heavy cruiser differed fundamentally from that of the armored cruiser. Also, the heavy cruiser was designed to take advantage of advances in naval technology and design, typically powered by oil-fired steam turbines rather than the reciprocating steam engines of the far faster speeds and could cruise at high speed for much longer than could an armored cruiser. They use uniform main guns mounted in centerline super firing charge rather than casemates. Casemate guns and a mixed battery were eliminated to make room for above-deck torpedoes, and ever-increasing and more effective superior fire control of the 1920s, and continually upgraded through the 1950s. Late in the development, cycle radar and electronic countermeasure would also appear and rapidly gain in importance. These developments meant that the heavy cruiser was an overall more powerful ship type than the armored cruiser had been. So, technically what they're trying to say is armored cruisers are trash. They're trash and trash and trash. That's why I like heavy cruisers. At the end of the 19th century, cruisers were classified as first, second, or third class, depending on their capabilities. First class cruisers were typically armored cruisers with belt-side armor were lighter, cheaper, and faster. Second and third class cruisers tend to have only an armored deck and protective hull bunkers rather than armored hulls. They were hence known as protected cruisers. The essential rule had not changed since the age of sail: to serve on long-range missions, patrol for enemy warships, and raid and defend commerce. Armored cruisers had proven less versatile than needed to do this adequately. In a race to outsize and outgun one another, they had grown to around 15,000 tons and up to 9.2 and 10 inches 230 or 230 and 250 millimeter in main gun caliber, very close to the pre-dreadnought battleships. So they wanted to improve their cruisers by making their guns stronger by adding larger caliber bullets, larger caliber rounds. Well, it's a logical thing. I know. I agree with this. Pre-dreadnought battleship of the day. Although they were generally described to be weaker than the battleship due to the lack of armor and not appreciably faster due to the limits of engine technology at the time, while Japanese armored cruisers had distinguished themselves by the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, the armored cruiser as it was when no one had reached the end of its development. So they are all desperate to try to improve the strength of armored cruisers, but still, turns out they're real trash. So they just decided to end its development. They don't need them. Tactics. Moving on, tactics and technology were gearing towards naval encounters held over increasingly long ranges, which demanded an armament of primarily large caliber guns. The demand for speed with which to outflank a potential enemy and fulfill its traditional role as scout for the fleet demanded a speed preferably 30% faster than battleships. 30% was the ratio by which frigates had been faster than ships of the line in the days of sail. If a battleship sailed at 20 knots, this would mean that armored cruiser would have to steam at least 26 or 27 knots. So, since it's failed, the armored cruiser is they discard armored cruisers, which the same thing happens to battleship, which is very sad. Armored cruisers could not fulfill these criteria without being built much larger and taking on different form than they had in the past. The result was the battle cruiser, and after after the armored cruiser got decommissioned, they commissioned it again in different form. Then why did you decommission it, man? HMS Invincible and her two sister ships were designed specifically to fulfill these requirements. In a sense, they were an extension of the armored cruiser as a fast, heavily armed scout, commerce protector, and cruiser destroyer. Reflected in the term originally ascribed to them, large armored cruiser. However, they were much larger, faster, and better armed than armored cruisers, able to outpace them, stay out of range of the weapon, and destroy them with relative impunity. So for them, it's so unbalanced. Yeah, unbalanced. Because they carry the heavy guns normally ascribed to battleships. See, battle cruisers is very strong because they are fast. Also, no, they're fast. Their main battery is the same as a battleship, and it's not fair for a cruiser to fight such a thing, which is a monstrous, fast, and strong, and bulky, which is it'll be very tough to take down. Moving on, they could also theoretically hold their place in a battle line more readily than armored cruiser and serve as the battleship cruiser for which William Hovgard had argued after Tsushima. All these factors made battlecruisers attractive fighting units. Although Britain, Germany, and Japan would be the only powers to build them, they also meant that the armored cruiser, as it had been known, was now outmoded. No more were built after 1910, and by the end of World War I, the majority of them had been taken out of active service. See? They are decommissioned faster than I expected. 1910, and when I first read on Wikipedia, I was shocked that they decommissioned the start of a ship they just started to build at 1905 and they just stopped at 1910. 5 years. Only 5 years. It's too fast for development, man. And at the end of World War One, the majority of them had been taken out of active service. So, yeah. They no longer built at 1910, but a lot of armored cruisers are still active at war, and after World War One, they've been taken out of active service, so they no longer patrol the seas or anything like it. Okay, moving on. Lord Fisher, the man behind the building of
It's
Invincible,
23 hours.
had hoped to replace practically all forms of cruiser with battle cruisers. They proved to be too costly to build in large numbers. At the same time, the third-class cruiser started to carry thin steel armor on the outside of its hull and became known as a light cruiser. The wide gap between the massive battlecruiser, perhaps 20,000 tons and 305mm 12-inch guns, and the small light cruiser of up to 5,000 tons and 100mm 4-inch or 155 155 or 6-inch guns actually left room for an intermediate type. The first such design was the British Atlantic Cruiser, proposal of 1912, which proposed a long-range cruiser about 8,000 tons displacement with a 190mm or 7.5-inch guns. This was a response to a rumor that Germany was building cruisers to attack merchant shipping in the Atlantic with 170mm guns. The German raiders proved to be fictional and the Atlantic cruisers were never built. However, in 1915, the requirement for long-range trade protection cruisers resurfaced and resulted in the Hawkins class. Essentially enlarged light cruisers, the Hawkins class each carried 7 190mm or 7.5-inch guns and had displacement just under 10,000 tons. The difference between these ships and ones that would follow with the heavy cruiser were almost as pronounced as that between the armored cruiser and the battle cruiser. One reason for this difference was the intended mission of these ships. They were not intended to serve as a junior battleship, as the armored cruiser had been, and were not built or designed to serve in that capacity, with their main armament of 203mm guns smaller than the typical 9.2 or 10-inch guns of later armored cruisers. Their intended targets were other cruisers and small vessels. Further reasons for the difference were the advances in technology and naval design, both of which the heavy cruiser was able to take advantage. Heavy cruisers, like all contemporary ships, were typically powered by oil-fired steam turbine engines and were capable of far faster speed than armored cruiser had ever been. It is also propelled by coal-fired reciprocating steam engines of the era. Nonetheless, heavy cruisers often had a large number of main guns. Some armored cruisers had a mix instead of uniform complement of main guns. A discarded demounting of main guns is casemates in favor of central line superfiring turrets, and benefited from the introduction of fire control in the 1920s and 1930s, meaning that the heavy cruiser was considerably more powerful. Okay, so And the fire control used was to shoot the entire the main battery by one. So okay, to make my explanation easier, uh, there I just say there's a cannon. They have four barrels, and there's a ship that have three cannons, and three cannons have four barrels, and per cannon have four barrels. That means you'd have 12 barrels. And fire control, uh, they fire it at the same time so that it's not a wave strafe. No, it's not a wave attack, but it's a concentrated one-shot attack that unloads everything in one. So it's quite a very considerable tactic in the past, since they didn't have enough accuracy and target system were still rusty. So uh, they use this to prevent it from misfire. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk. This is too much general right now, so I'm going to talk about to Baltimore first, and then I'm going to talk about Eugene. Since Baltimore, I never heard her name on the battlefield, but I'm just going to talk about her anyway. Okay, so USS Baltimore, hull number CA-68, was the lead ship of her class of heavy cruiser. The fifth ship of the United States Navy, named after the city of Baltimore, Maryland. Uh, I'm going to talk about designs, construction, and World War II. So Baltimore was 664 feet, or 202.4 meters long at the waterline, and 673 feet 5 inch long overall. She had a beam of she had a beam of 70 meter guns. She had a beam of 70 feet 10 inch and a draft of 24 feet 7.3 meters. She displays 14,472 long tons at 10 displacements and 17,0731 long tons. Okay, so construction in World War II. Okay, so Baltimore was laid down in 1941 at Bethlehem Steel Company's Fall River Shipyard in Quincy, Massachusetts. She was launched on 20th July 1942, sponsored by the wife of Mayor of Baltimore, Howard W. Jackson. The cruiser was commissioned on 15 April 1943 under the command of Captain Walter C. Calhoun. Following the completion of her fitting out, Baltimore departed for Hampton Roads on 17 June 1943, briefly visited the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis on 20 June, then conducted exercises off the Virginia Caves 2 days later. She went to Norfolk for upkeep between 24 June and 1 July, when she departed for shakedown of Trinidad. Operating from Port of Spain, the cruiser conducted gunnery training before returning to Hampton Roads on 24 July. 4 days later, she steamed to Boston for post-shakedown availability repairs to correct deficiencies found during shakedown and to correct a leak in the main battery hydraulic piping. Returned to Norfolk in early September after the completion of the repairs. Baltimore and the destroyer Sigourney departed for the West Coast. They transited the Panama Canal on 25 September and arrived in San Diego on 4 Oct, after which she trained off the West Coast from 9 to 13 October. Departing San Diego 3 days later, The cruiser arrived at Pearl Harbor independently on 29 October after a brief stopover at San Francisco. Between November 1943 and June 1944, Baltimore was a unit of the Fire Support and Covering Force at the Makin Islands, landing on 3 November for December 1943. Kwajalein invasion 29 January 8 February 1944, and the Truk raid 16 17 February, and Enotok seizure 17 to March on the 17th LT. Denver and Baxter USNR flying one of the heavy cruisers fought OS-2U Kingfishers covered by two Grumman F-6F Hellcats. Rescued Lieutenant George M. Blair, USNR of V-59 less than 6,000 yards from Dublin Island inside Truk Lagoon, where he had ditched his flag-crippled Hellcat. Baltimore continued to provide fire support in the Marianas attacks. The Palauiap, Ulithi Wuliao, the Hollandia, Truk Satawan Punape, Marcus Island, Wake Island, the Saipan invasion, and the Battle of Philippine Sea. So Baltimore is Cheryl is as a support. So she just provides cover fire. She just provides cover fire. So no wonder I didn't hear about her. I didn't hear about her ever. Okay. So this is just going to be brief. So I'm going to talk about, since Eugene already talked about it a bit in the last video, which is with Bismarck on Operation Rainbow. So I'm just going to talk about it briefly. Okay, so Prince Eugene was an Admiral Hipper class heavy cruiser, the third of a class of 5 vessels. She served with Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine, that's why it is the long term for KMS, during World War II. The ship was laid down in April 1936, launched in August 1938, and entered service after the outbreak of war in 1940. She was named after Prince Eugene of Savoy, an 18th century king of Austria. Austrian general, not king. She was armed with a main battery of 8-inch guns, and although nominally under 10,000 long tons, limit set by the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, actually displaced over 16,000 long tons. Yeah, Eugene saw action during Operation Rainbow, attempted to break out into the Atlantic Ocean with the battleship Bismarck on May 1941. Like I said, Operation Rainbow involved only 2 ships from German, which is Kriegsmarine Prince Eugene and Kriegsmarine Bismarck. Ouch. Actually, Operation Rainbow is meant to only Prince Eugene and KMS Bismarck. And there are other generals said that to provide at least 2 more ships for Operation Rainbow. But Adolf Hitler and Gunther, I forgot his black name, declined this and said that it was more beneficial for Germany to continue the operation with only 2 ships, that is KMS Prince Eugene and KMS Bismarck. Now, the operation resulted in the sink of HMS Hood. The heavy damage of Bismarck and Prince Eugene, which Bismarck eventually sank. Eugene got captured and also eventually sank due to nuclear tests. And yeah, that's exactly it. So I told you just I will talk about the brief history, so I don't talk about it more detail because it gonna take a very long time. And so yeah, I guess this is it. Thank you very much for watching my video, and um, see you next time. Goodbye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.